On June 30th, 2010, Park Yong-Ha was found dead at his home in Seoul, and the news landed with the kind of shock that feels heavier because it arrives in silence. He was only 32. To the public, he had never looked like a man standing on the edge of collapse. He looked gentle, composed, almost soothing by nature. The kind of actor whose sadness on screen felt beautiful rather than dangerous. That was part of what made his death so devastating. Park Yong-ha was not simply another celebrity in the machinery of Korean entertainment. He was one of the warmest faces of early Hallyu, a star whose image had traveled beyond South Korea into Japan and across Asia, especially after Winter Sonata helped turn him into a familiar name far outside his home country. Reuters reported that he had been dealing with severe stress, sleep problems, and the emotional weight of caring for his father, who was in the final stages of stomach cancer. But the public did not see those burdens clearly while he was alive. What they saw was the actor, the singer, the soft-spoken star with the calm smile. And that is where the tragedy begins, with the gap between the man people thought they knew and the pain they only understood after he was gone. What made Park Yong-ha's death feel even more haunting was how deeply he belonged to an emotional era of television and fandom. He was not the loudest star, not the most scandalous, not the kind of celebrity who demanded attention through chaos. He was loved because he felt close. Winter Sonata had helped make him part of the early Korean wave, and his popularity in Japan grew so strongly that Reuters described him as a popular singer there as well, with a run of hit albums and major recognition. That matters because it explains why the grief spread the way it did. This was not only the death of a Korean actor. It was the loss of a familiar presence in the lives of viewers and fans who had attached comfort, romance, and quiet longing to his face and voice. When the news broke, it felt less like a headline than like a rupture in something emotionally intimate. A man who had spent years giving audiences tenderness through characters and songs had reached an ending that felt brutally lonely. And in that contradiction lies the question that drives the entire story forward. How did a star who seemed to embody calm and emotional safety end up leaving the world in such private despair? Before the funeral, before the mourners, before the tears of fans from Korea and Japan, there was first this unbearable image, not the star under lights, but the silence that remained when Park Yong-ha was suddenly gone. Long before Park Yong-ha became a familiar face of the Korean wave, he was just a young man trying to find a place inside an industry that rarely waits for anyone to catch up. He was born in Seoul, but this part of his story does not need to linger too long in childhood, because the more important transformation began when he entered his teens and early adulthood. He stepped into entertainment in the 1990s, still young, still unformed, still far from the image the public would later remember. At that stage, there was no grand myth around him yet. There was only a boy with a quiet face, a soft presence, and the kind of emotional sensitivity that could easily be overlooked in a business built on speed, noise, and constant reinvention. Park Yong-ha did not arrive as a towering prodigy. He did not force the spotlight open. He moved toward it carefully, building himself role by role, learning how to survive in front of cameras before the world had decided what kind of star he would become. That matters because it makes his later image feel more human. Before he became a symbol of comfort and romance, he was simply a young actor trying not to disappear. His early career unfolded the way many careers do before fame turns them into legend. Quietly, gradually, without any guarantee that the work would ever become enough. He made his acting debut in 1994, and the years that followed were not yet the years of hysteria, overseas fame, or emotional devotion from fans across Asia. They were the years of practice, the years of waiting, the years of proving that his face could hold a scene, and that his sadness, even when restrained, could reach the audience. What made Park Yong-ha different was that he never seemed built from aggression. His screen presence came from warmth, gentleness, and something inward-looking that made people feel close to him without fully understanding why. That quality did not explode overnight. It deepened. Little by little, the industry gave him room, and little by little, He became the kind of performer viewers remembered even when he was not the loudest person in the frame. This is the Park Yong-Ha who matters in part 2. Not yet the Hallyu star, not yet the man fans would grieve across borders, but the young actor learning how to turn softness into identity before fame turned that softness into something the world would one day mourn. Park Yong-Ha did not become a star through noise. He became one through familiarity, tenderness, and the strange emotional closeness that certain actors seem able to create without ever forcing it. That is why Winter Sonata changed everything. Before it, he was already working, already building his name, already proving himself role by role. But after it, he no longer belonged only to Korean television. He became part of a wider emotional world that was opening across Asia. In the drama, Park Yong-Ha played Kim Sang-hyuk, and even though he was not the central romantic lead, his face and presence entered one of the most important works of early Hallyu. Winter Sonata is widely credited with helping trigger the Korean wave in Japan, and Park Yong-ha's role in that mattered more than it might seem at first glance. He fit perfectly into the emotional texture that made the drama unforgettable: melancholy, warmth, longing, restraint. He was not the kind of actor who overwhelmed a scene. He stayed with you after it. That quality made him ideal for a period when Korean drama was beginning to reshape the emotional imagination of viewers outside Korea. As Winter Sonata spread, Park Yong-ha's image traveled with it, and that travel changed the scale of his life forever. The young actor who had once been simply trying to survive in the industry was now part of one of the first Korean dramas to become a major cross-border phenomenon. In stories like this, that is the moment when fame stops being national and becomes something much more dangerous. Intimacy at a distance, where strangers in other countries begin to feel as if they know you personally. What followed was not just more visibility, but a second career built on the kind of devotion Hallyu stars rarely receive by accident. Park Yong-ha's popularity in Japan grew so strongly that he was no longer remembered there only as an actor from Winter Sonata. He also became a successful singer, signed with Pony Canyon, released Japanese albums, and won major recognition including the Japan Gold Disc Awards New Artist of the Year in 2005 and later Best Asian Artist honors. The Korea Times describes Winter Sonata as the series that catapulted him to massive fame in Japan, after which he shifted further into music while continuing to act. That is what makes Part 3 the brightest stretch of his story. Park Yong-ha was not merely successful. He became emotionally exportable, the kind of star who could walk into another country's cultural memory and be welcomed there. Fans did not only admire him, they protected him, followed him, and attached themselves to the quiet sincerity of his image. His fame in Japan, his concerts, his fan meetings, and his continuing screen work all reinforced the same feeling. Park Yong-ha was a star who seemed gentle enough to trust, and that is precisely why the rise matters so much. The brighter and softer the image became, the harder it would later be for the public to accept that anything dark might have been happening behind it. Fame gave him reach, music gave him another language to connect with people, and Hallyu gave him a place in a much larger emotional machine. But beneath all that light, the pressure was already beginning to grow, around a man the world had learned to love for seeming calm. The tragedy of Park Yong-ha was not built from scandal, collapse in public, or the kind of chaos that tabloids know how to sell. That is what makes it so much harder to look at. His darkness was quiet. The man audiences loved did not seem dangerous, volatile, or visibly broken. He seemed gentle, polite, emotionally controlled, the kind of celebrity people imagine as safe because he does not frighten them. But private suffering often grows most effectively inside people who have learned how to remain composed for everyone else. By 2010, Park Yong-ha was carrying pressures that the public could only understand in fragments after his death. Reports at the time pointed to severe stress, sleep problems, and the emotional burden of caring for his father, who was in the final stages of stomach cancer. There was also the constant weight of career expectations pressing down on a man whose image depended on appearing calm, tender, and reliable. That contradiction matters. Fame does not only reward a person, sometimes it traps them inside the version of themselves that the audience feels safest loving. Park Yong-ha had become a figure of comfort in the emotional world of Hallyu, an actor and singer whose softness had made him beloved across Korea and Japan. But once the public begins to depend on your gentleness, there is less room to show fear, exhaustion, or despair. The more people projected peace onto him, the less visible his suffering became. And that is why this part of his story feels so painful. He was not falling apart in a way the world knew how to recognize. He was enduring, quietly, under the surface of an image built from warmth. The star that audiences thought of as emotionally reassuring was moving through a form of private pressure that had no dramatic soundtrack, no public warning flare bright enough to stop the ending, only an accumulation of fatigue and sorrow inside a life that from the outside still looked intact. When the end came, it forced the industry and the public to confront once again how easily a person can disappear behind a familiar face. Park Yong-ha died at home in Seoul, and the shock that followed was sharpened by the unbearable intimacy of that setting. Not a stage, not a film set, not a public collapse under cameras, but a private home, a private mourning, and then a sudden rupture that no fan, colleague, or viewer could undo. Reuters reported that investigators viewed the death as a clear suicide, and the surrounding details only deepened the tragedy. A son under strain, a man losing sleep, a public figure carrying a grief that had become too heavy to hold. What is haunting is not only that Park Yong-ha died young. It is that he died while still existing in the public imagination as someone gentle enough to survive by staying quiet. His story exposes a cruelty at the center of celebrity culture. The world often mistakes silence for strength, politeness for stability, and a soft smile for proof that everything is still under control. Park Yong-ha became one more reminder that the most devastating pain is not always the pain that announces itself. Sometimes it is the pain hidden inside routine, inside obligation, inside care for someone else, inside the exhausting effort to keep looking fine because everyone around you has grown used to needing that version of you. That is why his death still feels so difficult to process. He did not vanish in noise. He vanished in a kind of emotional overextension that many people only recognized after it was too late. Beneath the dramas, the songs, the fan meetings, and the carefully held image, Park Yong-ha had been carrying far more than the world knew. And when that weight finally broke him, what remained was not scandal, but a terrible silence. The silence of realizing that someone so associated with warmth had been suffering alone. When Park Yong-ha's funeral was held in Seoul, the grief no longer felt private. It became visible in the tears of fans, in the faces of fellow actors, and in the silence that followed his coffin out into the open. Reports at the time noted that mourners came not only from Korea but also from Japan, a sign of how far his warmth had traveled during the height of the Korean wave. One of the most unforgettable images from that farewell was So Ji-sub carrying Park Yong-ha's memorial portrait, while fans cried along the route and cameras captured the painful finality of the moment. For someone who had died in such private despair, the funeral revealed a different truth. He had been loved on a scale he could no longer fully see. What remains now is not just the tragedy of how Park Yong-ha died, but the softness of what he left behind. He is remembered through Winter Sonata, through his music, through his fan meetings in Japan, and through the quiet sincerity that made people feel close to him even from far away. Some stars are remembered for power, some for brilliance. Park Yong-ha is remembered for gentleness, and that may be why his loss still feels so painful. He did not leave behind a loud legend. He left behind a fragile absence, the kind that lingers because it once felt like comfort. Even now, the farewell surrounding him says the same thing his life once did, that tenderness can be unforgettable, and that the people who seem the calmest are sometimes the ones the world understands far too late.